All right. Welcome to the DadNation Podcast, where men go from good to great in their life and love. Listen, now more than ever, our world needs strong, compassionate, and courageous men, because we believe that when the dad gets better, the whole family wins. And listen, this movement is called DadNation, but ultimately this is for the wives and the children and the generations to come, because we believe that every wife and child deserves a husband who's pursuing greatness. My name is Mitchell Osman, and I am so grateful and humbled that you've decided to spend your most precious resource, which is your time, with us today. Listen, in today's episode, we are going to talk about how to master your self-confidence and to slay your insecurities. And listen, if you're here and you're listening to this and you're struggling with any one of these scenarios, maybe you're struggling to start that passion project and you're afraid of what people might think of you if you fail, right? Maybe every time you go to the pool or the locker room, you feel uncomfortable in the changing rooms. Maybe you might feel insecure and uncomfortable with expressing vulnerability and talking about your emotions with your spouse. Maybe you avoid having that conversation about what you do when you're at parties and talking with other people because you feel insecure about maybe how much money you make or what you do for a living. And perhaps maybe just deep down, you're afraid that your wife may not find you attractive. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why us as men are insecure and we face insecurities, but we never talk about it. And if we don't talk about it, we won't know how to fix it, right? So before you brush that off, know that you are in good company, my friend, because no, I'm not reading your mind with everything I just listed. Actually, I'm just telling you all the insecurities that I have dealt with in one way or another over the course of my life. So you're among friends, my friend. I've been there, and listen, we're going to talk about it. We're going to dig into it, okay? So we're going to talk about, like I said, the 3 steps. How to master your self-confidence. This is probably one of the most misunderstood, ambiguous concepts out there today, especially for men. Like, what does that even mean, self-confidence? You see, as men, when we lack self-confidence, we do all kinds of things to overcompensate, right? It's silly and it's kind of juvenile, but we can't really help it. We just naturally try to make up in some areas where we lack in others. And I struggled with self-confidence for years. And it wasn't really until I heard this definition that it really connected with me on a deep level. And the definition was, they basically said the easiest way and the most practical way to gain self-confidence is to keep the promises you make to yourself, right? To keep the promises you make to yourself. Now, you might be listening to this and you might be thinking, well, why do I have to make promises to myself and keep them and all this kind of stuff? Why can't I just, if I just get enough affirmations or compliments, then I'll just become more self-confident? It doesn't really work like that, right? Confidence must come from the inside out. Compliments don't always lead to confidence, right? You can't leave it up to others. You can't leave it up to your wife or your kids or your friends, because you can't really prop yourself up on that. Because we think about it, right? When you do get a compliment from somebody, what happens? 5-10 minutes later, after that high fades, you're right back into that insecure rut. You're questioning yourself, having that negative self-talk again. And that's just kind of what happens. But a proven track record is the only thing that's going to outweigh that insecure mental narrative, right? For the dudes walking around with no insecurities and no issues. But the reality is it may be simple in principle, but it's not necessarily easy to practice, right? So we're going to break it down even more, and we're going to talk about, like, how do we get to the point where we're insecure? So where does this lack of self-confidence come from? Well, it's the same place that it comes from when you lose confidence in any other area of your life. It's when trust is broken, right? Think about it. When your friend doesn't follow through and they make promises, they say you're going to show up at 7 p.m. To hang out or go for a beer or whatever, and they don't follow through and they don't show up, okay, there might be an excuse. So the second time there might be an excuse, but after time, you start losing confidence that they're going to follow through, right? When your kids lie to you about something, or when your spouse isn't honest, it begins to slowly erode the confidence in that relationship, right? This is the exact same thing with your relationship with yourself. This is why we call it self-confidence. So we have to understand that just because nobody else knows about it and we're just breaking these little promises to ourselves, that doesn't mean that it's not doing damage, right? Because you're eroding your rapport or your reputation with yourself. So it's all about, that's why we're talking about making promises and keeping them. Make sense? Okay. So let's take it back to the beginning, right? At what point did we become insecure, right? Because we weren't born this way. We weren't born riddled with insecurities as little babies, right? We weren't born feeling self-conscious and insecure. It all starts when we become uncomfortable with expressing our fears and our worries, right? You see, as men, we've been raised to be tough and to be strong. And if we're feeling insecure, weak, or vulnerable, we shouldn't be talking about it, right? A lot of us have fell victim to that narrative. And there's actually a psychological term for this, and it's called normative male alexithymia. Normative male alexithymia. That's a mouthful. But the American Psychological Association defines it as a subclinical form of alexithymia found in boys and men reared to conform to traditional masculine norms that emphasize toughness, teamwork, stoicism, and competition, and that discourage the expression of vulnerable emotions. So this same American Psychological Association describes this as a type of emotional challenge that many men will face, especially if they're brought up to follow traditional ideas of being tough, working in teams, keeping a stiff upper lip, and being very competitive. These norms discourage them from showing vulnerable emotions. This happens to us all the time. This was me growing up. So when we face hardship or failure or any kind of other kinds of adversity, what do most of us do? We buckle down, we press on, and even when we struggle and we fail, we don't talk about it, right? We continue to just stuff it down, and there's this negative narrative playing in the back of our minds that we're not fully acknowledging, and it says you can't do this or you're not strong enough. And so even if and when we eventually cave and we break our promises with ourselves, we become ashamed, we become disappointed, and this just reinforces this negative self-narrative that's going on because our brains then just say, see, I told you you weren't going to do it. See, I told you that I was right all along. You weren't strong enough to pull that off. And so we break promises with ourselves all the time, and it becomes this cycle, this cyclical nature. So, for example, it might be a lack of ability to be consistent with working out, like we said, or maybe you're a habitual procrastinator, or maybe there's an addiction that you can't seem to break free from, and then you keep falling back into. I mean, it could be anything, right? But it could also be because of the hurtful things that others have said to us in our lives. Maybe it was a parent, maybe it was an old relationship or a meaningful friendship where trust was broken and hurtful things were said. Maybe growing up or at some point in your life you heard you're not going to amount to anything. Maybe you heard you aren't the smart one in the family. You know, maybe you heard, maybe your ex-wife or wife said you're a terrible husband, you know, or you're lazy or whatever the case is. These words that we hear just erode, again, our ability to believe in ourselves. And they usually come from broken trust, right? So it's these things, whether the things that we say to ourselves or things that others say to us, that's going to tear down any shred of hope that we had to be confident in ourselves. And then the problem is both of these scenarios with self and with others, is they kind of play off of one another. Again, another cycle, right? So for example, when we are hurt and we're discouraged by others, it reinforces our own negative self-talk, right? But then also when we have negative self-talk existing already, it increases our chances of breaking our promises and not following through, which then when it happens, it causes others to speak negatively towards us and say things like, I can't trust you anymore. You're not a man of your word, which then fulfills what you've already been saying, and it becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy, and so the vicious cycle continues. And over time, this broken trust and these broken promises, whether it's to ourselves or to others, they become this screaming insecurity, right? Because like I mentioned in the beginning, we're just proving to ourselves that we're not trustworthy. And this is not uncommon, right? It's clear that we struggle with emotional health and insecurities and depression, and it's time to acknowledge it and overcome it, and begin taking the steps that we need to take to live a passionate, purpose-filled, confident life, right? I'm going to read you some statistics about sort of our mental health and our challenges we face as men, and I'm hoping this will normalize it for you a little bit if you're listening to this and you're skeptical or you're hesitant, right? So according to the American Psychological Association, men are less likely than women to seek help for mental health issues, with only 1 in 4 men having sought mental health care in the past year. And that study was done in 2020, which was right in the middle of the lockdown, COVID. So that's interesting, only 1 in 4. When it comes to our body image, this statistic is fascinating. The National Eating Disorders Association reports that 25%, or 1 in 4, of individuals with anorexia or bulimia are male. And men are less likely to seek treatment for these disorders due to the stigma. 1 in 4 people who struggle with eating disorders are men. That's wild. When it comes to suicide, right, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention states that men die by suicide 3.56 times more often than women, with firearms being the most common method, right? Or in other words, men are 256% more likely to die by suicide than women, according to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. According to mensjournal.com, the most common insecurities in men today are the following, 6 things here. I'll read them out to you. Relational stability. In a past relationship, maybe you've been cheated on, or you've cheated on your spouse or your girlfriend, and that can leave you feeling helpless, or like that you're going to get cheated on again. Number 2 is job security, which I mentioned. And the problem is, in our Western culture, so much of a man's identity is wrapped up in what we do that for a living, that we dread sometimes having those conversations with people. Like, that's one of the first questions you hear when you go to a party and you're socializing. What do you do for a living? A man can often wrestle with feeling like he isn't providing enough for his family or isn't secure enough in his career. Number 3, financial security is a big one for us as men. What would the next 10, 15, 20 years look like? What does our future hold? And are we fully taking care of our family? I mean, these questions can be pretty daunting for us as men. And the thing is these insecurities begin to bubble up when we experience life change, like additions to the family, right? When we're single, we're not thinking about it. But then when we get married and all of a sudden we're responsible for this woman in our lives, then all of a sudden that insecurity bubbles up of, can I provide? And then you deal with that, and then you have a kid, and then all of a sudden you're thinking, can I provide for this kid? And you have a second kid. And so these things, it's like whack-a-mole, it'll pop up and you kind of deal with it. But financial security is a big one for us as men. Number 4, body image, right? Maybe you're listening to this and you're unhappy with your appearance. Maybe it's your height, or maybe it's, early balding, or your physique, whatever the case is, right? Probably all of us have felt this at one point or another. I know that I certainly have. It's the classic in the locker room or the pool, like I mentioned, or the beach party. Number 5, the last one here, is emotional intimacy. Again, this one's huge for men. Being honest and vulnerable in a relationship is a very common issue for guys. And sometimes it's because it's connected to some secretive, shameful behavior in the past, or like addictions we've had or we currently have. And sometimes it's connected to how we were raised, right? Again, that normative male alexithymia. Many of us weren't encouraged to talk about our feelings and to talk about our emotions and be able to express them. And so what happens is you grow up and you get married, and your wife wants to talk about your feelings, to talk about what you think about certain situations or particular experience. And it can actually sometimes feel like a threat to your security or your emotional well-being, right? Another one is not meeting expectations. Another big one, right? Unmet expectations can be poisonous for men. And these could be expectations you put on yourself, or expectations that maybe your boss or superiors set, that can make you feel like you're constantly in this race to perform. A lot of us are people pleasers, and we live our lives just wanting to make everyone else feel better. But more often than not, these high standards that we put on ourselves, or situations we find ourselves in, are often only met with disappointment, with resentment, and feeling like you aren't capable, which isn't the case. So I'm hoping that you're hearing by now that This is common. Listen, we're all in this giant proverbial boat together, right? Men struggle with insecurities. Men struggle with loneliness. Men struggle with many things that we don't often talk about. We suffer in silence. We suck it up because real men don't get emotional, right? Real men are confident, right? At least that's what we were told growing up. But it's time that we talk about it. And the last challenge here is like, you might be comfortable enough to say you struggle with insecurities, but maybe you look around in your social circle and it seems like you are the only one talking about it, right? It feels like you're the only guy struggling, and every other guy has it all figured out, right? Have you ever been there? I know I've been there, but I promise you, the guys with the six-pack abs, the guys with the big fat bank account, the guys with the full head of hair, whatever the case is, everyone's ego takes a hit in one way or another. So we're all in this together. But this episode is not about teaching you how to appear confident. This episode is going to be about developing confidence, right? And that requires us to dig a little deeper. So we've talked a little bit about how we got here, what happens, and why we struggle with it. Now we're going to jump into the 3 steps, as I said, to mastering your self-confidence. Okay, let's get into it. All right. Number 1 is to change your mind and ultimately change your decisions, right? That's the big step here. And I know what you're thinking, right? This sounds really vague and ambiguous. Well, what does that even mean, right? Well, we're gonna get real granular here, and we're gonna unpack it because there's a lot more to this than probably you realize. First of all, it's important that we understand that like up to 95% of the things we do in a day happen subconsciously, right? So let's reverse it. That's like 5% of what we do during the day. 5% of the decisions we make are conscious. Right? Everything else is subconscious. If you were to convert that into time, that means 22 out of the 24 hours that we're breathing in a day are happening on autopilot, are subconscious, right? We're making decisions without even thinking about it. So first of all, it's important to acknowledge that so much of our lives just kind of happen, right? And pass us by without even realizing. That's why we use that phrase, time flies. Because we're actually not even consciously aware like 95% of the time. So this all starts with taking control of the decisions we make, right? The more we can bring our subconscious thoughts to our conscious mind and make conscious decisions, the more beneficial and clear decisions we can make to achieve our desired result. Make sense? And if gaining confidence is a matter of making good decisions and promises and keeping them, then this is going to require a lot of intentionality and follow through, right? I love this quote from Jordan Peterson in his book called 12 Rules for Life. And he says this: you must determine where you are going so that you can bargain for yourself so that you don't end up resentful, vengeful, and cruel. You have to articulate your own principles so that you can defend yourself against others taking inappropriate advantage of you, and so that you are secure and safe while you work and play. You must discipline yourself carefully. I love this last line. He says, you must keep the promises you make to yourself and reward yourself so that you can trust and motivate yourself, right? Now, it sounds simple, but like I said, it's not easy. So why is it so hard to change our mind? Why is it so hard to change our actions? Why is it just so easy to coast and to keep doing what we've always done, right? So we'll talk a little bit about the subconscious, then we'll talk about the conscious, right? So there's some things that happen subconsciously in this whole narrative. You have this mental narrative, this mental chatter that's going on in your head while you're going about your daily life. And you may have heard of this term self-sabotage. But really what happens is if you don't truly believe deep down that you are deserving of the said goal or the said result, if you don't really genuinely believe deep down that you can do it, your brain, your subconscious mind begins to go to work to prove that that is correct. Because your brain is essentially a device that's just trying to make sense of everything around it. It does not do well if there's a juxtaposition or a contradiction, right? If your actions don't line up with your thoughts, the brain is always just trying to make sense of it. So what'll happen is you'll actually subconsciously derail yourself from these goals and these commitments just so that your brain can say then, see, I told you couldn't do it. See, I told you weren't smart enough. See, I told you, right? Because again, it's making sense of the things you're saying. And so ultimately, so many of us actually self-sabotage our own plans without even realizing it. The second part is another term that you may have heard. It's called the imposter syndrome. And what happens is when people start taking appropriate steps to success and start achieving their goals and becoming more confident, there's a voice deep inside that says, this is not you. This is not who you really are. No one's going to believe you. No one's going to trust you. You're an imposter. And we become riddled with this fear that we're not who we say we are. And then that's another thing that sometimes we do subconsciously to sabotage our plans. Because again, we're trying to make sense of what's going on and align our actions with our deep-rooted beliefs. And so this is why it's really important to really take those subconscious thoughts and bring them to the conscious mind so that we can begin to correct it, right? Now, when we're talking about conscious decisions, right, why is it hard to make the right decisions? Well, number one is we live in a world that's just riddled and polluted with this concept of instant gratification, right? We're so comfortable in the Western world. And this idea of voluntary hardship, of intentionally choosing the hard road or dying to yourself for a moment or delaying gratification just sounds so crazy, and it's so difficult for us to do, right? But you think about it, everybody wants to live on the mountain. Everybody wants to live on the mountaintop. But if you've ever, I mean, I live around the Canadian Rockies, and so we've hiked lots. And when you get past the tree line and you get on the top of the mountain, what's up there? Nothing. Nothing is up there. It's just a bunch of rock because it's so exposed. There's no growth on the mountaintop. It's not sustainable to stay up there. However, when you go down into the valley, this is where you see growth. This is where you see rivers flowing through, animals living, rich, lush forestry. And so we become obsessed with being on the mountaintop. We don't want to go in the valley. We don't want to do the hard things. But the valley is where growth comes from. Remember that. In fact, we're going to talk about this a little bit later. Intentionally do the hard things, right? I love this quote from Theodore Roosevelt. He says, "Nothing in the world is worth having or worth doing unless it means effort, pain, or difficulty." Another reason why we struggle to make the right decisions and consciously make efforts to become more self-confident is because deep down we're afraid of the person we might become, because that person's still yet to be determined, right? We're uncomfortable because even if we didn't, we could see who that person was and we could see what that life would be. We simply don't know him yet. We don't know what that journey is going to look like. And this creates this feedback loop into this self-sabotage and this imposter syndrome. I love this quote from Virginia Satir that says, "We feel better with the certainty of misery than the misery of uncertainty." I'll read that one again. "We feel better with the certainty of misery than the misery of uncertainty." We hate the unknown. And sometimes failure is easier to comprehend because we know exactly what it looks like and what it's going to feel like. There's another quote from Jordan Peterson I love, and he says this: "Failure is easy too. It's easier not to shoulder a burden, not to think, and not to do, and not to care. It's easier to put off until tomorrow what needs to be done today and drown the upcoming months and years into today's cheap pleasures." Man, that quote is so true for me, and it has been in the past. Failure is so much easier sometimes to think about because it's what we know. So another reason why we struggle to make good decisions and actually follow through with them, or to make new goals and commitments, is because oftentimes they actually don't resonate with our deepest core values, right? They don't connect with our deepest sense of why. Because making good decisions sometimes can be very, very hard, as we've been talking about, right? They can be painful. They can require self-denial. They can require delayed gratification. And so when your motivation and your willpower wear off, you need to be able to connect with something deeper, your deeper sense of why, right? Why you exist. We're talking deep, deep, deep stuff here. And so this is why we talk about Whypower versus willpower, right? Your Whypower is always going to be stronger than your willpower. And let me explain. So if you're being powered by your why, I mean, you're thinking about, so say, for example, if you're listening to this and you're a dad, when you're thinking about being powered by your why, a why might be something like this. I want to be able to keep up with my kids when I'm playing tag. I want to be able to attend their grade 12 graduation. I want to be able to prevent an early onset of some disease that's in my family so I can walk my daughter down the aisle. These are all things that are connected deeply to our why, to be an amazing husband and an amazing father. I heard the statement a little while ago, which was really powerful, and it was, you don't get what you want, you get what you need. You don't get what you want, you get what you need, right? And I can't remember who said it, but it was on a podcast episode, and he was using this analogy of, if someone's holding a gun to your head and they said to you, you need to lose 30 pounds or I'm going to pull the trigger. Or if they said to you, you need to have an amazing relationship with your wife or I'm going to pull the trigger. Or you better show up for your kids on a whole new level or I'm going to pull the trigger. At that point, when everything is on the line, right, you need to do that and you will get what you need. You better believe you're going to lose the weight. You better believe you're going to go home and make amends with your wife, because there's no want to this. This is absolutely a need. And so I love this, how this why is connected to more of a need than a want, right? When you start thinking about some of these deeper layers. The problem is when your decisions are connected only to your willpower, you're only going to make the good decisions when you're feeling up to it. And the reality is our willpower is limited. For example, you could think about this mug of pens. This could represent each good decision you could make in a day. There's only so many you can make. So you get up and you go to work and somebody comes to the office and they bring in a big chocolate cake and you say no to that chocolate cake. All right, now you've only got 5 decisions left, but you go out for lunch with your buddies and everyone's having cheeseburgers and fries and beers, and you decide to have a chicken salad and club soda. Boom, that's taken out 3 decisions, right? You're on your way home from work and somebody cuts you off in traffic and you just want to lose your cool and snap your lid, but you choose not to. That's another one. And you've got 1 good decision left in the day. By the time you get home and see your wife and kids, you've got such little margin left. You got such little capacity to make good decisions, whether they're, emotional, relational, physical, when it comes to food. So we're going to come back to this idea of your willpower and how to strengthen your willpower. But remember, for now, the important thing is that you must connect with your why over your will, because your why is going to win out always. I love this quote that I'll read you from Friedrich Nietzsche. He says, "He whose life has a why can bear almost any how." Love that. So how do you work out your willpower, right? Because that's something we could do, just like your biceps or your back or your legs, whatever the case is. Just as you can fatigue it, you can make it stronger. Now, how do you do that? You do it by testing it, right? You do it by intentionally doing the hard things, by saying no more often, by following through on the things you said you would do. This allows you to start stacking small wins, which will grow your confidence in your ability to follow through and do the things you said you would do, right? So let's park here for a moment, because there's something really cool I want to explain to you about willpower and how we can work it out. Okay, so I'm about to geek out here and I'm going to get a little nerdy, but stick with me, because this is really good, especially when it comes to building your willpower and working out your will, right? So there's a brain structure called your anterior midcingulate cortex, okay? Now, there's a lot of data in humans showing that when people do the things they don't want to do, like exercise, working out, reading, whatever, or when people resist doing the things that they want to do, like resisting eating out or whatever, that brain area actually gets larger. And here's what's interesting. So this AMCC, we'll call it for short, is smaller in obese people, right? And it gets bigger and bigger when they diet. Now, this anterior midcingulate cortex actually is quite large in athletes. right? And it's especially large in the people that see themselves as challenged or people who have overcome a significant amount of challenge in their life. You see, in many ways, scientists are beginning to see this thing as one of the main factors that determine your willpower and that even determine your will to live. And all the data points back to the fact that we can build this area up. But as quickly as we build it up, if we don't continue to do the things that are hard for us, this part of the brain actually shrinks again. And here's another important distinction. If you begin to enjoy the things that you once did not enjoy doing, so for example, if you started working out and then all of a sudden you start to like it, then you're no longer doing the hard thing anymore. And these same tasks lose its effect on this part of your brain. This is why it's important to always be looking for new ways to challenge yourself and do things that you aren't good at. And do things that maybe you don't enjoy for your own good to keep your willpower strong. So neuroscientists are discovering that this is why people get stuck in ruts and cannot form new good habits or break bad habits, right? Because they're only doing things that they enjoy and not dying to their desires for their own benefit. So they're not putting the phone away and stopping the doom scroll. They aren't monitoring what they eat. They aren't exercising. They're not reading. You fill in the blank. So really simply put, from a neurological perspective, if you want to develop more willpower and make your mind stronger and more resilient, you must engage in doing things that you do not want to do. How's that for good news today? This is why I say if you want to have a strong willpower, do hard things, right? Make promises to yourself that are uncomfortable and keep them. Because now we can prove that when we do this, our anterior midcingulate cortex grows larger and our willpower becomes stronger. I love this quote from Niccolo Machiavelli. It says, "Where the willingness is great, the difficulties cannot be great." Where the willingness is great, the difficulties cannot be great. What that means is it doesn't matter what you're facing in life, right? If you grow in your willpower and your self-control and your resilience, that's the doorway to taking these steps and dealing with the setbacks and making a constant effort and ultimately creating the change in your life that you're seeking. And remember, this takes time and effort and consistency, right? Consider the farmer who plants his seed and continues to water his crops and tend to his crops throughout the whole season, right? He doesn't expect instant results. He doesn't. He knows that the key to a fruitful harvest is hard work and consistency over time. The successful farmer would never plant seeds and then go tear them up 3 weeks later to see if his harvest is there and his crops are growing, right? We have to be the same way in how we think about our goals and how we think about the quality of our decisions. Don't be the farmer that keeps ripping up his seed to see if it's growing yet. Give it time. Put in the reps. Listen, it's a long journey going from struggling with self-confidence to being fully confident, but it comes in many cycles as well, right? So if you're struggling now to grow in your confidence in a certain area, let me explain a concept to you that's really going to give you more clarity on how confidence is achieved. And it's called the confidence loop. Now, this is a feedback loop whereby competence creates confidence, and then that confidence creates more competence. And as loops do, the inputs create more output, which then creates more input, and so the cycle repeats, right? So think about it. When we're actually competent in something, or sufficiently prepared, our confidence is actually quite a bit higher for going into something with competence. So the tricky part of this cycle is to actually start the loop, because this requires awkward first steps and fears and stumbling and feeling silly. Sometimes simply having a skill isn't enough, right? We also need to actively believe in our skills to fully capitalize on these things. So why does this cycle work so well? Well, here are a few reasons, right? So when you're starting the cycle, you taking the first steps on something or anything can feel pretty daunting. But afterwards, after you do it, there's this rush of confidence, this excitement as we realize that thing wasn't that bad. It wasn't that difficult. It wasn't that hard. And this tends to create more confidence. right? The next time we go to do it. There's another concept called neuroplasticity, which we'll talk about at another time, that tells us that our brains can actually rewire themselves and make new neural networks and pathways at any age. Or put another way, our skill or our competence is something that can be strengthened, just like a muscle over time. And third, there's a compound effect to this, right? It's a real thing. These actions that build up over time create significant results, right? The compounding effect, we see this all over our lives. Now, on the flip side, if you avoid doing new things and avoid developing your skills, you won't gain competence, which means you won't gain confidence. It will remain low, right? So the best way to do this is by harnessing the power of this concept and starting the loop. That's the hard part. So here's an example of how this works in real life, right? So let's look at it. The initial stage. Picture yourself, you're at work, you have to give this presentation, and you're fearful because you've never spoken in front of anybody before, and you've got this fear of public speaking. So you got this low confidence. However, you prepare diligently, you learn about some effective speaking techniques, and you practice your speech multiple times. So you're gaining your competence, right? Then the second step is, again, like I just said, you gain competence, right? Your first presentation is not going to be perfect, right? But your preparation pays off, and you manage to deliver it reasonably well. And this initial success boosts your confidence a little bit, right? So then you get the third part, which is this surge of confidence, right? Because you did okay in your first presentation, the confidence in your ability to speak in public grows. So you start volunteering for more opportunities and to speak and share your ideas with your team and your colleagues, even despite how you still may be nervous. And then what happens is you see continuous improvement, right? With each new speaking opportunity, your confidence keeps increasing. As you refine your skills and you learn from your mistakes, and you even seek feedback from your colleagues, this dedication to improvement enhances your competence in your public speaking. And then you get this positive feedback loop, right? Because as your competence improves, your confidence continues to rise. And now you look forward to public speaking engagements because you know that you can handle it well. Your colleagues notice your improved performance and your improved skills and your improved self-assuredness, which then can lead to more opportunities and positive recognition. And this will eventually lead to mastery, right? Over time, you become a proficient and a confident public speaker, and it no longer feels intimidating. You might even be asked to lead presentation or train others in work on how to present publicly and to develop their speaking skills. This is a really cool loop that happens. And if you really think about the difficult things that you've tackled in your life or the ways you've grown in confidence or competence, you'll see these cycles happening all the time. A real fresh example for me is this podcasting. I mean, this is literally episode 2. I'm just starting this loop, and now, but I trust the system because I've done these loops in other areas, like in my fitness and in my finances and my relationship with my wife. And so I understand that it works, and I know that with time, I will become more and more comfortable and confident and competent, right? And I'll just keep working that loop. But right now, it's pretty scary, and I feel awkward. And honestly, I daily struggle. I was telling my wife this morning, like yesterday, when I really kind of threw out my personal take on the page and I spun it a little bit, I was pretty nervous because you're thinking, man, what are people going to think? Are they going to judge me? Are they going to think this podcast is lame? Are they going to think that I don't know what I'm talking about? Are people going to take me seriously? And so how do you do that? You just got to start the loop. You know what I mean? So I say all that to say, hey, I'm with you in this. I'm living this right now with the podcast. All right. So next thing, listen, if there's one thing that you remember from this podcast episode, I want it to be this: confidence is a result, not a requirement. All right. Well, what does this mean? Well, listen, I'm notorious for being a perfectionist, right? I don't want to do something unless I feel like it's going to be perfect, even if it's for the very first time. I've always felt like I'm required to have it perfect the first time in order to step out and do something, anything. But the flaw in that logic is that it holds you back from ever doing anything because you simply can't be confident in doing a thing before doing that thing, right? James Clear wrote a statement on his Instagram a little while ago that said this: don't feel qualified? Nobody does. You can only be qualified to do that which you have already accomplished or trained for. Then he says, anything new is accomplished by unqualified people. Think about that. Anything and everything new is accomplished by unqualified people. I don't know about you, but that gives me some hope today. For example, when my wife became a first-time mom, she, wanted to be perfect and perfectly confident with it. But of course, it's brand new. It's going to take some adjustment, right? When I started going to the gym and weight training, man, walking out on that weight floor, it just felt, I was so nervous and I was so scared because I felt like, man, I just wish I was more confident. But of course, I wouldn't be confident. It was the first time I was doing it. Now it's a little different. That was a long time ago. Now I'm walking in and I'm confident because I know what to do. I know where to go. But that's because confidence is a result. It wasn't a requirement for me to start doing it. So start changing your mind, start changing your decisions. And in the moments when you feel most insecure and you want to quit, remember that confidence is just on the other side of following through with those commitments. All right. You just need to give it more time. You need to give it more reps. You need to build rapport with yourself. Or as Alex Hormozy says, you need to outwork your self-doubt. You got to keep following through on those decisions that you said that you were going to make, right? And whether that's, not picking up fast food every day on your way home from work for a quick snack, or whether that's not pushing snooze and sleeping in and skipping your workout, or whether that's like doing the mindfulness practices to keep it cool with your wife and your kids, whatever the situation is, whatever the struggle is for you, this is the key. This is the step one. All right, I'll end this section, this first step, with another quote from James Clear. And he says this: if you keep doing what you're about to do today for the next 5 years, will you end up with more of what you want or less of what you want? And for me, I'm always asking myself that question. What am I doing today to get more of what I want in the next 5 years? Now, when it comes to building your confidence, once you've set your mind in the right place and you've primed it for success and you know which decisions you need to make, now we need to talk about what it's going to look like to optimize your environment for following through and making those promises easier to keep, right? So the second key to reclaiming your confidence as a man is to change your environment. Now, the environment you place yourself in, whether it's socially, whether it's at work, or whether it's personal, at home, this can have a massive effect on how difficult or easy it is to grow in your self-confidence and to build trust with yourself and with others. And this is true for two reasons. All right, number one, there's a quote, it's a very famous saying that you've probably heard a million times by Jim Rohn, and he says this: you are the average of the top 5 people you spend the most time with. Now, why is this? Because at the end of the day, we're just parrots. Yep, your mom was right. You are who your friends are. You will eventually become who your friends are. This is undisputed psychologically, right? This allows us to draw the conclusion that if we want to be more confident and stick with our promises, we need to spend time with more people who do the same things. Now, we're all battling that negative inner voice that tells us that we're not good enough, we're not going to follow through on the things we said we would do. And it's hard enough to be able to silence that self-sabotager on our own, let alone when we surround ourselves with other people who are insecure, who break their promises, who are self-deprecating, right? So here's the thing. I want you to think about the 5 people that you spend the most time with right now, okay? Think about those 5 people and ask yourself, how do they live, right? Are they disciplined? Are they confident? Do they follow through? Do they live a life that's worthy of imitation? Do they celebrate your wins and cheerlead you to be better? Or do your victories make them envious? I want you to think about these questions and make these decisions for yourself. Maybe it is time for you to change your environment and to make it easier for you to keep the promises you made. Start stacking those wins and start celebrating with yourself and with others. Another big reason why it's important to change your environment is because we have limited willpower, like we talked about with the analogy. Because of this, it's important to optimize our environment so we don't fatigue our will prematurely. Now, let's think about that pens in the mug analogy, right? If you don't think that's legit, then we're just going to unpack that a little bit more. Think about this. Like if you come home from work, you've had like a 12-hour shift, the last thing you want to do is keep making big decisions. The last thing you want to do is keep saying no to the things you want, right? The more tired you become physically, the more tired you become mentally and emotionally. That means your promise keeping is going down the drain the longer we go throughout the day. When do you see advertisements on TV for fast food? Late at night. You're not seeing commercials for Whoppers at 9 a.m. from Burger King. right? When do you see the R-rated TV shows coming on? Well, maybe with Netflix you could choose, but back in my day when we had cable, it would come on late at night because that's when people have their lowered inhibitions. That's where they're going to choose to watch that stuff because they can't say no. When do you fall into traps of snacking and impulsively eating? 95% of the time, it's late at night. Like, I don't know about you, but I'm not like 8:30 in the morning craving a bowl of chocolate ice cream. But 10 o'clock at night, when after I've been binging a bit of Netflix, yeah, it's hard to say no to that because I've fatigued my will. And so the list goes on and on. But modern marketing agencies know this, right? So they capitalize on our will when it's weakest, right? So you're at the greatest risk of being impulsive at the end of the day when you've expended your willpower. So how do we fix this, right? Well, here's the trick. We design our environment so that it's easy to make the right choice and remove the option of making the wrong choice. And this concept is called environment design. And this has been documented well in James Clear's book, The Atomic Habits. If you haven't read that book yet, buy it and read it. It's so, so good. So with environment design, it's all about choosing what gets our will wisely, right? And designing your environment in a way that's optimal to making the right choices and makes it more difficult to make the wrong choices. Because it's important that you save that finite willpower for what matters most. So for example, because we've been using this context of fitness and diet and nutrition and stuff, I'll use an example here of a way that you could design your environment to make the right decision. So if you're having a hard time with saying no to snacking late at night or impulsively eating super like high calorie or fatty foods, you can consider some of the following ideas. So think about your day to day, say if you go to work in an office, do you find yourself in situations where people are always bringing in donuts and cakes and things like that? Or could you remove yourself from that environment so that you can save, that mental energy so you can make better decisions later on in the day? Because what's going to happen is you're going to be spending so much of your time and energy saying no to the chocolate cake and no to the donuts and no to whatever, that by the time you come home, you won't have any energy for making the right decisions. Or, for example, another option is when you get home, what does your pantry look like? Take the high calorie snacks out of your pantry or your fridge and replace them with healthier alternatives so that you can, if you have the snack, you're snacking on food that's a little bit more rich in vitamins and nutrients and minerals and less fatty and calorically dense, right? So for example, you can replace your M&Ms with watermelon and cherries, blueberries, or other fruit. You can replace the potato chips with something like popcorn, right? It's a lot lower in calories. You can replace the soda, the Coke and Sprite and all those things with like sparkling water or a zero-calorie beverage. These are ways to design your environment to make it easier for you to follow through with the decisions that you said you would make, right? So now, that was the context of fitness. Now, in the context of family, for example, and you would say that you have a hard time keeping your cool when you come home from work because you've had a long day and you come home and your wife has had up to here with the kids and your kids are screaming. You're coming into a situation where you're already depleted emotionally, mentally, physically, and this leaves you, again, with very little margin to make the right decisions, right? So I'm going to give you a couple tips that you can consider to help you stay patient and help you keep your cool and to design your environment in a way that's conducive for you to get the results you want. Number one is change your inputs, right? So listen, if you got a commute, right, on the way to work and on the way back, consider changing what you're listening to on your drive, right? So if you listen to the radio or if you're listening to the news, a lot of this stuff can be negative and it can generate anxiety and stress and worries, or maybe you're listening to just stuff that's just not helping you. Perhaps what you can consider doing is listening to some type of inspirational podcast or self-improvement content, or maybe just listening to like calming, chill music to just keep your blood pressure low as you're driving home so that you're filling your bucket as you're driving. So when you get home, you're not coming into a house where the energy level is high, but you're coming from a situation where your energy levels are high because you're anxious because of what you heard or what you were listening to, right? The second idea is what I call the preparation pause. Okay, so you park your car right before you go into the house. It's a simple exercise. You just take 5 minutes, right, and you do the following: you grab your phone and you take a couple minutes to just wrap up any unanswered emails or texts or phone calls. Just wrap up all those loose ends so work is not on your mind anymore. Then second, take an opportunity to practice empathy and gratitude, right? Think about your wife before you go in the room and think about the day that she might have had. Think about how the kids, how that whole day might have went for her, and put yourself in her shoes. This will allow you to walk into the room with more grace and more empathy. And the last thing is the 4-7-8 breathing exercise. I want you to take a couple minutes and do 3 or 4 repetitions of this exercise. And essentially, all this is you breathe in for 4 seconds, you hold your breath for 7 seconds, and you exhale for 8 seconds, right? You do that 2 or 3 times, man, and you're just you can feel your body relax, you can feel your shoulders lower, feel your mind clearer. And here's the thing, after doing those 3 things, tying up all the work-related things, taking a moment to practice empathy and doing these breathing exercises, you will have cleared your mind, you will have practiced empathy, and you will have relieved any conscious or subconscious stress that could easily push you over the edge when you get in through the doors, right? These are ways that you can design your emotional and your mental environment to prepare you to give your best self to your wife and your kids, right? So what's the moral of the story here? Well, the point of all this is that you must decide on what is most important and save your energy for those things. Because if you give your best energy and your best decisions to the unimportant things, the most important things in your life will suffer. So for example, this happens all the time. We go to work and we give our bosses and our colleagues the buffet, and we come home and we give our wife and our kids the scraps that are left over. But they deserve our best attention, right? So choose what you will exercise your will on, and do not waste your willpower. This distinction is what separates the most present, content, and peaceful men from the ones who are fatigued, irritable, and impatient. So once we've connected our goals to our deepest values, right, our why, we've primed our mind, we've optimized our environments, the third factor we need to consider is the community that we surround ourselves with. And this is last, but potentially the most important of all 3 points, and that's to change your community. Did you know that the American Society of Training and Development states that you have a 10% success rate if you have an idea or a goal? So just by having the goal, 90% of people won't see success, right? But now your chances of success go to 25% if you consciously decide to do that thing. And then it goes to 40% if you assign an actual date to when you will do it. Then your chances of success go to 65% if you tell someone about it. But here's the kicker. Your chances of success go to 95% if you are accountable to somebody or in a community that's holding you accountable to your goals. And in the fitness world, these numbers are even more staggering. I can't remember the exact numbers, but it's something like out of all the people who do hit their weight loss goal, 95% of the people who have lost a significant amount of weight will gain it all back and then more within 2.5 years. And this is because these people haven't truly changed their habits, they haven't truly changed their environment, and they haven't truly changed their community. And ultimately, they're not changing themselves, the narrative behind what they're telling themselves. Their behavior hasn't changed. Listen, these statistics tell us a couple of things: that most people don't follow through with the goals they set or the promises they make to themselves. And number 2, community is a critical catalyst in following through and keeping your word to yourself, right, and to others. Now, remember that quote by Jim Rohn, that you're the combination of the top 5 people you spend the most time with? Well, that applies here as well, because being around like-minded, confident, authentic, and inspiring men are going to exponentially increase your chances of keeping your promises, building your trust back, and becoming confident in the man that you say you are, right? So what's the best way to remedy this insecurity, this loneliness, this addiction, the anxiety, the other things that we've been talking about today? Is to simply change your community. Get around men that model a great life for you so that you can see that progress is possible for yourself. How do I know that this is effective? Because even in reverse, it works. If you start with changing your community, what happens is you get in a community of accountable men and you're inspired to change, and then you change your environment, and then ultimately your mindset changes and you change your decisions. And hey, while we're camped out here for a second, I want to tell you about something that I've started and the reason for it. I started the DadNation Coalition, which is cohort or small group coaching of 12 men or less, where we go on this 6-month journey together and we do a deep dive into our main domains, like our fourfold focus, which is our family, our fitness, our focus, and our future. And this is where these three powerful components come together. When you're in that tight-knit community and you're accountable together and you're checking in and you're sharing stories and you're learning that things are possible. You change your mindset, you change your environment, you change your community. You simply can't walk away from something like that without being transformed. And so while we're here, some of the things that the men in the DNC get are weekly cohort coaching sessions, a 24/7 private group chat with myself and other members of the DNC. We get daily accountability check-ins. I give you workout plans and nutrition plans to get the body you've always wanted. And we do a DNC graduation retreat, which is a weekend of masterminds and reflection and hikes. And I teach you additional tools and resources to draft your playbook for success. And all this takes place in the world-renowned Canadian Rockies, which is right in my backyard, which is Banff, Alberta. So listen, if you're the kind of guy who likes a good challenge, you're the kind of guy who is open and ready to be changed, I'll put the link to the application in the show notes here down below if you're watching on YouTube. But if you're listening to this podcast on audio, just go to dadnationco.com/coaching to learn more, and you can put your name on an application list to get into the next intake season for the Dad Nation Coalition. All right, moving on. I recently heard the term copioids, and to explain how we as men use all kinds of substances and different methods to cope with our struggles, rather than changing our environments and changing our minds and doing the deep work. Right now, why is this happening? Why are we so wrapped up in just coping and drowning our mind in distractions and vices? It's because it's easier. Right? Simply easier. Of course, it's going to happen this way. Change is uncomfortable for most people, and oftentimes it's painful. But remember that quote from Jordan Peterson I mentioned earlier: failure is easy too. It's easier not to shoulder a burden. It's easier not to think and not to do and not to care. It's easier to put off until tomorrow what needs to be done today, to drown the upcoming months and years into today's cheap pleasures. So listen, find yourself a community of men who will champion you, not criticize you. Men who will celebrate when you keep your promises and start seeing success. Find men who will not be intimidated by your newfound confidence, but will be excited for it. It doesn't have to be through my coaching community. It could be anywhere. And if you're not sure where to begin, okay, if you're listening to this and you're like, well, I don't know where to start with this, I want you to grab a piece of paper and a pen, and I want you to just think about all the men that you know in your life. And I want you to ask yourself, out of everyone I know, who exhibits these qualities, right? Who has an unshakable confidence? Who has the healthiest marriage that I know? Who's in the best shape of their life? And I want you to just write their names down and simply reach out to them. Send them a text, give them a phone call, grab a coffee, take them out for a beer, ask them to share their journey with you. Ask them if they'd be willing to mentor you, and or simply just have an accountability relationship. What we often don't realize is people love to share and people love to help others. And if we can help others with things that we've learned, it's a win-win. All right, so don't be afraid to reach out to the men in your life that you know that might be able to help you on the journey. All right? So there we have it. The 3 steps to conquering your self-confidence: changing your mind, changing your environment, changing your community. Right? Now listen, as we wrap up this episode, I want you to remember that you are the only one who can take control of your mindset and grow in your self-confidence. No one else can do this for you. Your wife, you can't do it. You can't expect your kids to do it. When you binge Netflix, no one's going to reach through the TV and grab the remote from you. You know, when you're going to the gym, there's not going to be a pack of cheerleaders, cheering you on to go into the gym and work out. It's going to be cold and lonely, and you're going to need to do it without applause, right? You have total control. In his book, Your One Life, Lance Witt phrases it this way: You didn't ask to be born, and you can't get out of dying. But what you do in between, you have a lot of say over. What you do in between, that's called your life, right? And if you're listening to this and you're already feeling that inner voice starting to make excuses and you're starting to tell yourself you can't do this, I want you to remember what I said. Confidence is a result, not a requirement, right? Don't wait to be confident to do something. I want you to expect to feel insecure, expect to be scared, expect to be doubtful, but still start making those small promises to yourself over time and keep them. Start stacking those wins, and over time, you'll feel yourself becoming more confident, and you will be able to confidently say, I am who I say I am, and I do what I say I will do. All right? I want you to think about this analogy. The most successful mountain climbers in the world take the smallest steps, right? The people who have tackled the most dangerous summits in the world understand that taking large steps engages your largest muscles, and that's going to lead to premature failure, right? So the key to getting to the top of the mountain is by taking small steps, hundreds of small steps, one at a time. You see, the end of all of this sounds real sexy and exciting, right? You're on the mountaintop, you got tons of self-confidence, but in reality, the execution of this is quite boring. And that's why so many people kind of fall off the grid, because they expect the journey to be exciting, but it's actually just mundane and boring day after day, simple steps, right? This is why Alex Hormozy says doing ordinary things for an unordinary amount of time creates extraordinary results. All right, that's good. That's good. So listen, I promise you, if you do these three things, if you change your mind, which will change your decisions, and you change your environment, and you change your community, you will be an unrecognizable man in 9 months to a year. So as we wrap up this episode, I want to leave you with some questions to consider and reflect. All right. Number one is, what's an area of your life that you keep breaking promises? Because there's a high probability that that's the area in your life that you are most insecure and least confident in, right? So are you insecure in your ability to be a great husband? Are you insecure about your body, right? Are you insecure about your ability to provide for your family? Think about that. Number two, think about your mindset and think about the promises you've made and broken in the past with yourself and with others. And I consider these questions. Have you ever self-sabotaged yourself, your own goals and your dreams in the past? Or have you ever chosen what's easy and familiar over what's hard and unfamiliar? Number three, think about the environments that you find yourself in. Think about your social environments. What are the characteristics of the 5 people you spend the most time with? Are they confident? Are they inspiring? Are they motivated? Are they hardworking? Or are these people insecure, defensive, kind of lazy, lacking motivation, and kind of always just do the bare minimum? And when it comes to your physical environments, what kind of environments are you placing yourself in, right? For example, if you're trying to lose weight, is your pantry filled with unhealthy snacks? Do you have all the food delivery apps on your phone? If so, delete them. Is your gym bag tucked away in a closet? If it is, I want you to go grab it, pack it full of fresh new clothes, and I want you to stick it in front of the front door so you can't leave the house without grabbing your gym bag, right? Optimize your environment for success. Another question is, do you find yourself drowning your mind in distractions, whether it's video games, social media, porn, weed, booze, whatever the case is? Think about that. Are you trying to escape from something that you should be facing? Another question is, think about your social network. Who could you reach out to today that can hold you accountable to make sure you start making great decisions and keeping the promises to yourself? Or somebody who can celebrate with you and not criticize you for the big moves you're making in your self-confidence. And the last question I want to leave you is my favorite, and it's by a well-known author named Seth Godin, and he asked this question: what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? What would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? What career move would you make if you knew it would work? What fitness goals would you set if you knew you'd see the exact results that you wanted? What leap of faith would you take if you knew that there was success on the other side? Well, the reason why I love this question is because it allows us to filter out our fears, because it allows us to strip away the fears and ask ourselves, well, if I knew there was no way I could fail, what would I do? And it helps us answer the question free of insecurities and fears. That's the last question I want you to wrestle with today. and think through that. What would you do and why aren't you doing it? Is it fear that's holding you back? All right, so if you're watching on YouTube, I want to hear from you, okay? So if I want to know, what step are you going to take today to start conquering your self-confidence? Leave it in the comments section below. I'm looking forward to reading your answers. So that's it for me, my friends. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's honestly an honor and a privilege that I get to share some of my insights with you, and I'm so thankful that you find this valuable and tune in. So don't forget to tune in next week for an epic episode with my buddy Adam. Listen, this guy is an author. He's a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He's a fitness trainer. He's an ultra marathoner, and he's going to share some incredible insights on how to break out of the yo-yo diet, how to get control over your mind and your relationship with food, and how to train like a beast to get the body of your dreams. All right. It's going to be a good time. I'm looking forward to sharing this with you. And listen, don't forget, as always, I am in your corner, my friend. Have an amazing day. We'll talk soon.